First up, when a commercial airliner was shot down over eastern Ukraine last week, it made headlines across the globe. But as the media covered the tragic end of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 around the clock, the line between good reporting and ghoulishness got blurry. WGBH News reporter Adam Riley has more. First, a word of warning: some may find this content disturbing.
As Sky News' Colin Brazier stood amid the wreckage of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, he struggled to describe the scene.
It's heart-rending, it's difficult, not least in how we choose to broadcast certain images.
And then a moment later, Brazier made a choice he'd regret.
Here, I think it's a small girl's bag, isn't it, by the looks of things? A set of keys, a toothbrush. I mean, we shouldn't really be doing this, I suppose.
That unleashed a torrent of criticism, prompting apologies from Sky News and Brazier himself, who admitted he'd erred and said he'd been overwhelmed by the carnage. But if Brazier overdid it, he wasn't alone. This New York Times video was even more graphic.
Вот позвоночник, блин. Вот позвоночник. Вот руки.
The Times also published this photo on its front page, which Times editor Dean Baquet defended, calling it one of the most beautiful pictures of war I've seen in a long time. Also of intense media interest, the handling of the victims' remains.
Not to be too gruesome, but we have heard that the bodies are beginning to decompose. I would imagine the smell is horrific.
Still, the reporters on site seemed to know they were walking a tightrope.
We do have to be so sensitive in trying to convey what we are seeing and experiencing here.
A task that isn't easy when the cameras are rolling.
So where is the fine line between conveying the horrible and grossing people out? Joining me to hash it out are Tom Fiedler of Boston University, Neiman Journalism Fellow Susie Banakarim, Marjorie Egan of WGBH News and the Boston Herald, and Dan Kennedy of Northeastern University. Well, over the years, I've always been rather consistent on this, which is I think the more observations that a reporter makes, the better informed we are, even when that includes really, really gruesome detail and horrible images. There's no defense about picking through the luggage, and I think that BBC Sky reporter acknowledged that. I think the most disturbing thing all week to me was Dean Baquet's defense of that photograph. I actually thought the photograph was okay. But to call it one of the most beautiful renderings of war he's ever seen in his life is nauseating and wrong, because it was not an act of war. It was an act of terrorism. And all this justification that journalists go into, especially the high and mighty, it's nauseating. And it was a stupid thing to say.
I don't know what to make of what Dean Baquet said, and maybe I'll leave that aside for the moment.
I just said it. It was stupid.
Yeah, okay. Maybe the thing that I found the oddest about this was the idea that Colin Brazier could walk around the wreckage and
couldn't happen here.
And if he had never gone any further than that, nobody would have said a thing. But because he took that next step of bending over and handling some of the material, it went from being something that no one would have said anything about to something that was highly offensive. Now, he shouldn't have done it, as he's acknowledged. I'm not sure that it's that much of a difference. I'm really not. I was also looking on YouTube at some footage of, it was either Russian or Ukrainian news footage, and it went way beyond anything we've seen. Bloated, and this was professional news footage with bloated bodies and everything. It's been hard to watch.
You know, I'm always loath to jump on the press in these kind of situations, because there is a fine line, and people have different ideas about what's okay and what's not okay. I think that you want to say beforehand, as you just did, that this could be upsetting to people, and if this is going to upset you, don't look at it. But I don't like, you know, as a reporter, you want to convey what happened, and you don't want to sugarcoat what happens. And where that line is between conveying what happened in a tasteful way and then stepping over the line, yeah, the guy going through the suitcase was kind of weird, because I think it's sort of a look and don't touch, or photograph and don't touch. But, you know, I looked at pictures that showed the woman with her arms upstretched. I don't know who did that, but it was just a very upsetting photograph, but I think there was nothing wrong with showing that photograph, because this is what happened.
No, I mean, I tend to agree, right? I think that we bear witness because that's what journalists do. We show you difficult things so that you're aware that they're happening, or it's not our job to sugarcoat them. But I do think that the issue here, especially the Sky News reporter, right, who's apologized and who recognized what he did was wrong, is that this isn't a relatively unusual situation, right? Because it did happen in a war zone where no one was able to contain the scene. You wouldn't even usually have this opportunity to be sort of milling around amongst dead bodies and their possession. So these are sort of the times where journalists have to demonstrate the most integrity, right? The public trust sort of comes from the idea that we behave the best we can in these situations. And I think what's been a little hard in this case is that line has gotten a little blurred. It didn't really feel like rifling through what was clearly like a little girl's suitcase was really necessary. The emotional impact of just showing me that suitcase would have been the same. Would have been enough. And so, you know, I think it's the responsibility here is that we have to make clear choices that further the story. And if you're doing something, you just really need to make conscious decisions about it as opposed to just reacting in the moment. And it seems like he just reacted without thinking, and that's just never a good idea, you know.
You know, I think on balance, I think the reporters who have been there have been very sensitive to what's clearly an unusual and a terrible scene. On the comment from Dean Baquet, a terrible choice of words. There's no question when you put the word beautiful into a situation that's horrific. And I don't know exactly what he was trying to say, but if you just look at that photograph and think what are the words that would come to mind in that photograph, there was a sensitivity about that. Apparently there was an act of I don't know, of respect that some person had taken to put the flower on the figure. And so there was something about that act that was very humane and
covered the body.
And covered the body. And that may have been, again, I'm not making excuses, may have been what Dean Baquet was trying to get at, is there was something very humane about someone's effort to show respect there. Just a terrible choice of words.
Adam Riley was very upset about a lot of the coverage because he was particularly disturbed about people talking about what the smells inside the train cars and the planes and on the ground. But I mean, you know, as I said earlier, it's sort of part of the senses. I mean, we're not going to get that through a television or through a newspaper, and if that's what it is,
well, that's
I
also
haven't seen this with other stories before, though.
Because you're never that close.
But it's also because that was part of the horror that they waited so long to move these bodies, and that just showed the inhumanity.
No one is ever at the site of it. Even a car accident, you're a half a mile away.
No, that's true.
Right, and I totally agree with that, and I think, again, that this required a lot of sensitivity. The one thing I think that, like, we can't forget, right, in all of these conversations, is that these are people's families, right? When you show me that suitcase, if that's my child, or when you show me this picture, okay, even if it's an act of humanity with the flower on it, that's someone's daughter, that's someone's wife. So I think the thing, and maybe I err on the side of being overly sensitive in situations like this to those families, but I think you really have to remember every time you do or say something in this situation that those are people's families out there.